Hello, here's my drawing of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. I'm going to be doing a narrated video for it now. I mostly used Gioconda Kohinoor charcoal pencil, but I also added a little bit of red pastel to make it a little more interesting. I'm going to be taking you through the drawing process. First I'm going to start working on the dark background a little bit using this mechanical pencil with charcoal lead. It's also Kohinoor. I use that for more coverage. And then I'm going to blend it with my blending tools. Here I'm using a tortillon. So I'm going to want to make the edges darker and then make it a little bit lighter towards the head. Now I'm starting to work on the outer edge of his head and hair. Making these strokes to try to imitate his spiky hair. It's a fairly dark scene, so there's going to be a lot of darker areas and shadows around the eyes and under the nose. So lots of charcoal dust as well. So a large shadow under the nose, lots of areas with shadows and a lot of contrast between lighter and darker areas. Like I said, I've mostly used charcoal for this, and I used that mechanical pencil with charcoal lead for larger areas, and most of the time I use this Kohinoor Gioconda charcoal pencil, which is a soft charcoal pencil, so it can be blended and smudged very easily. Here and there I will add a few details with black colored pencil. So you can see that I don't really care how I cover these large areas. I'm going rather quickly because I will be blending all of it, so it doesn't really matter what it looks like right now. And it does look like a bit of a mess. But that's the way it is when you work with charcoal. At one point it always looks like a mess, and then you start blending and refining and adding more detail, and it just ends up looking a lot better, cleaner, more detailed. Another tool that I use for blending is a brush. It's a stiff bristle brush, and as you can see, I can either use it to create soft transitions or cleaner edges, because when I point the brush towards the claw like that, I can create a clean edge. Basically I push the charcoal all the way to the edge. But right now I'm not really too concerned with the edges because I just want to remove that texture that was created from applying the charcoal pencil and make the area smoother, remove those white spaces and just blend it thoroughly. So moving on to the other eye again, lots of these heavy shadows under the eyebrows or around the eyes, and the same goes around the mouth and under the nose and on the sides of the face. I'm doing a little bit of light shading on the face and just refining the hair a little bit more, and then I'm going to be blending that with a brush. As you can see, I don't have to cover everything. When I shade like that, I just do a little bit of shading and then use the brush to smudge it around, and then you get a nice darker tone. And later, if I feel that I need to refine the shape of the face a little bit, I can make certain areas lighter. I can lift up some charcoal using a kneaded eraser or using a pencil eraser. That's the white pencil that I'm holding right now. It's actually an eraser, and right now I'm using it to draw some of the highlights on his hair. So this is just like a regular eraser, except that it's smaller and a little bit more precise, and it can be sharpened. But it needs to be clean and relatively sharp so that you can pull these nice cleaner lines. So that's a little bit of shine on that hair, and now I'm refining the shape of the face and adding a little bit of hair here and there. And whenever you work with charcoal, you have to expect that there will be a lot of charcoal dust, that it will be messy, and that you will be blending a lot, as well as erasing a lot. Erasing is a big part of drawing with charcoal. Sometimes you can deliberately make an area darker to create or establish a mid-tone, and then the main part of the drawing starts by lifting up some of that charcoal and creating some of the raised areas which are receiving more light, and creating an image that looks a little more 3D, or looks like it has a little more depth and volume. So right now I'm moving on to the arms, and I'm going to be doing some light shading with a pencil. And it doesn't matter that there are all these lines, that texture is going to disappear eventually once I start blending. But I wanted to say a few words about the background. You can see where I'm going with it. I want to make the area around the head a little bit lighter, and the edges around the edges a lot darker, because I want some contrast with the background. And now you can see that I'm working on the anatomy, and I blended all of those initial lines. These are the claws, the adamantium claws. I need to add a few details there and maybe define the edge between the claws and the background a little bit more. And also try to make them a little more straight. Now I'm actually going back in with the sharp charcoal pencil and doing some additional shading on his muscles. I want this area between the shoulders and the bicep to be a little bit more defined. I want the shoulders to be a little bit more defined. Hugh Jackman had very low body fat in these movies, A lot of people were speculating whether he's natural or on steroids. Well, everybody has their own opinion. I think most of the celebrities use steroids for when they want to get a lean muscular physique for a movie. That's just the way it is. Anyway, I need a little bit more shading on the forearm, and I'm also going to be adding the hair. But as I'm doing the same that I did previously. When I feel there's too much texture, I just blended it with a Tortillion. And now I'm defining this shadow under the forearm a little bit more because I want more depth. And that's the hair. I want his arms to appear more hairy. And now moving on to the hands. And I'm just using a dirty Tortillion. I added a few strokes of black colored pencil on his forearms as well. Now the claws on the other side. Doing the same thing with the arms. Just first going over some of the darker areas. And then I'm going to do a little bit of initial shading and then blend and then do some more shading and then some detail. I added some of these folds in the shirt, but I'm going to get back to that a little later. So I've cleaned up the edge on those claws a little bit, added a little bit more shadow, and some more detail and texture on the shirt. The black color pencil is useful for some of these details because it can be sharpened to a finer tip and it smudges less. Shading around the knuckles. And around the claws to create more contrast. Like I said, this is a very soft charcoal pencil, so the charcoal can be moved around very easily. And now mostly blending with a bristle brush, cleaning up the edges a little bit with a Tortillion. Right now I'm using a little bit of white chalk. When I feel that an area needs to be blended even more softly, I can add a little bit of white charcoal or white chalk, and then I just blend that and the area becomes smoother. I don't really like using white charcoal or white chalk for highlights or finer details. I just like using it for blending because that's where I get really nice results. As you can see, this area is a lot smoother now. The thing that you need to keep in mind when working with charcoal, like I said, is that there will be a lot of blending, and you often damage the surface of the paper at least a little bit, so that's just the nature of the medium. So I always recommend it's better to work on a thicker paper that can take more abuse. I use a cheap local brand, but you can use any paper, like I said, as long as it's a little bit thicker. Now I'm adding a few of these details on the shirt, trying to add a little more texture to it so that it looks a little more realistic, but not to spoil these folds. And by the way, my signature will be in the lower right corner, and I already made an indentation using a pointed stick, so eventually when I go over it with a charcoal pencil it will show up as white. I decided to do that instead of erasing because I wanted it to show up nicely, and so that I don't have to worry about whether it will whether there will be enough contrast. One of the things that makes drawing hands so difficult is that people usually rush over them. That happens to me too. I tend to focus on the face and some other parts of the body, and then I sometimes tend to oversimplify the hands. What makes this even trickier are these claws, so they're kind of modifying the normal anatomy of the hand and the knuckles. But you can see that I did a lot of shading on them using just a tortillon, and then picking up some of those highlights with an eraser. Now I'm just blending the arm to get a smoother tone to cover that with a mid-tone, and then I'm gonna go back in with a charcoal pencil and just shade some of these darker areas, blend them in again, pull some highlights with an eraser, and then maybe add a little bit more texture and some hair on his forearms. Again, working on the shoulders and the biceps like I did on the left arm, his right, trying to make more sense out of that area, trying to make that transition between the bicep and the shoulder a little bit more pronounced, and also adding a few shadows casted by these claws to create depth. You can see those shadows under the claws. These are a nice touch, a very important part of the drawing. Whenever you have these shadows, like for example on his forehead or on his shoulders, you should always use those because they will add a lot to the realism and to the illusion of depth in your drawing. Adding these hairs, this part of the drawing took a little bit of time, but I sped over it a little bit, so we're watching most of it in time lapse. I couldn't really tell you how long the drawing took in real time, but I think it was no longer than 8 hours. I think maybe a little bit more, but around 8 hours. As you can see, my signature is showing up down there. Now I grabbed a red pastel This is a master's touch pastel. They are not the highest quality, but they'll do a decent job here. I'm just randomly adding a few of these red details to make the drawing a little more gory and a little more interesting. I'm going to add a few of those on the shirt as well. There we go. That's the finished drawing. Thanks for watching.